Hello and welcome everyone to the Solo Multimedia Podcast where I give you my unfiltered take straight off the cuff, and today I'm going to be talking about the new album from Black Midi, Hellfire. But before I do, I kind of just want to take you through the journey of this band because it's all kind of relevant and it's sort of an interesting story, I guess. But basically, for those who don't know, Black Midi are a kind of strange UK post-punk experimental jazz fusion-y kind of band. They've really crafted their own sound over the years, to be honest, even though they're still a relatively new band. But one thing people don't often know, because they've blown up pretty big at this point, is that actually when they first started, they grew a lot via buzz about their live show in the underground music scene of London, or Brixton specifically, actually. So before they even had a single song release, they were selling out like small pubs of, 100 sort of like 200 people, I suppose, which isn't a crazy amount of people or anything, but it's definitely one hell of a feat considering how hard it is to grow without utilizing the internet in some way these days. So to be able to sell out even 100 tickets or 200 tickets in London just off the back of like essentially good management and a very, very captivating live show is definitely no small feat. So I was kind of hearing about this band from the very get-go, from their very inception. I think the first time I saw them was after they released their first single, which was BMBMBM off their first record, Schlagenheim. But this was before the album was even announced. They literally just released this song as a single, completely on its own, void of context. And I saw them play to a sold-out Electroworks, which is, I want to say, a venue that can hold maybe I don't know, I would guess at least 400 or 500 people, but it might be slightly bigger. So that was just, again, a very impressive feat, kind of going to show how much draw the band had, I guess. And upon first seeing them, I was definitely very impressed with how energetic and tight their set was. They were obviously very natural performers as well. They had a flair of showmanship, even though nothing particularly over the top or theatrical was happening on the stage, which I guess would be a sign of things to come to some extent. But the show was very impressive, very captivating, ton of energy, very, very tight, clearly very impressive musicians from start to finish. So there was definitely, a lot going for them. And then after their first record dropped, they got a lot of buzz thanks to, Fantano picked them up. I think Pitchfork covered their album. So there was definitely a ton of buzz around this band right from the get-go. And I thought the first album was a really, really good mission statement. I fucking adore the vast majority of it. I think it has a lot of really, really high energy riffs, a unique mix of the sounds they're dabbling in, even though it isn't particularly innovative on the first record, I guess. It is all stuff you'll have heard before, but perhaps in a unique mix that maybe brings a little bit more to the band that you might expect. But either way, still a very, very good first record for sure. And after hearing that, I was very excited for the band's future. And that kind of got heightened after they dropped the song John L from the second record, Cavalcade. So this was a record that seems like there was a lot of hype building up to and a lot of people were very excited for. And after they dropped John L, I was incredibly excited because it felt like they found a way to really make a more distinct sound for themselves while without losing any of the incredible musicianship or the really organic type playing, while still making it feel like everything was what's the word, not prepared, planned out, I guess, but without feeling inorganic or stilted. It had a very jammed out and just sprawling, expansive quality to it, but again, while still feeling very tight and kind of prepared, I suppose. So the song was very mind-blowing to me, especially with the extra instrumentations. It really sounded like they had elevated themselves above just their influences as well. So like I said, very, very excited for the record. But when it came out, unfortunately for me, I didn't enjoy it quite as much as everybody else. I felt like the record was split in two halves. I felt like half of it was straight up the best material they'd put out at this point, no questions, whatsoever, just absolutely the most banger material they had out at this point. But the slower songs on the record really, generally, I found unfortunately quite boring. I felt like they didn't have the same level of progression or the same level of instrumentation and careful layering that many of the other more amped tunes had. Especially a song like Ascending Forth, I just have never enjoyed. I find it really boring, more or less, from front to start. Or sorry, from start to end. So yeah, that was kind of an unfortunate miss for me, but it definitely wasn't something that I was super bummed out about because, like I said, half the record is still amongst the best material I think they've ever made. So with all that context, oh, and I guess actually I saw them live as well one more time after Cavalcade came out, and you could tell like they've really improved their showmanship even more at this point. They've got like quite a lot of goofy energy, which is very strange for a band that sounds as often menacing as this, but whatever, that's neither here nor there. They were amazing the time I saw them, which was at Wide Awake Festival. It's like an open-air day festival in London. And with all that context, I was obviously quite excited to hear this new album. All the singles I heard up until this point, I've only listened to a couple times, and they were all really, really good. And essentially, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm very happy to say that this new album, Hellfire, is, on a first listen, absolutely everything I could have possibly hoped Cavalcade to be. It's a colourful explosion of what they do best while defining their sound even further. It doesn't feel like it's in two halves like Cavalcade did. All of these softer, more dynamic moments are given kind of more gravitas. There's more creativity behind them to separate them between themselves. And it's weaved into the DNA of this record itself. It feels like everything is so much more cohesive on this record, which is something that Cavalcade lost after Schlagenheim, I felt. I love all the extra instrumentation, which was there on Cavalcade, but here it's just used, again, in a much more cohesive way, in my opinion. The, like, prog jazz fusion insanity is just weaved into every little part of the record, even when it's more math rocky and intense, when it's more psychedelic, or when it's quieter. It doesn't really matter. And again, many of these songs are much more dynamic than they've done before, but I guess we'll just kind of go through the track. The whole thing opens with Hellfire, which is a really short opening song, kind of more akin to an interlude, I suppose. But the point is it sets the tone, and it does it very well, because it has a bunch of like very contorted and strange sounds for the rambling vocals to just go ham over. It's very strange, and it picks up one thing, and there's one thing on this record that's done better than any other Black Midi record by a long shot. This record is so much more cinematic, over the top and theatrical than the other records, without losing that sense of kind of almost Swans-esque menace, I suppose you could say. But the first proper song that you get on this record is Sugar-Zoo. And it's just one of the most manic songs I've heard Black Midi put together. It's got this ultra speedy, core, flurry, math rock, widdly riff that's embellished with all these wind instruments over the top and these unrelenting drums. I love the ascending hits of horns throughout the tune. Structurally, it feels incredibly dynamic without ever losing its sense of energy. It has some of those like more jazzy, quiety sensibilities that really help the kind of more heavy, more intense bits hit as hard as they possibly can. It's just a banger of a tune. It's 3 minutes of insanity. You have to go listen to it. It's great. And then the next tune, Eat Many, doesn't really slow things down, but it does come with a slightly more psychedelic vibe to it. There's still a ton of layers and a ton of... it's just like a very dense song that you have to take a while picking apart, and I certainly haven't, but there's like a bunch of really interesting percussion to give it a very strange, like slightly off-kilter like rhythm in the background. At multiple points over the track, you've got... Well, I mean, the whole track really is held together with a more acoustic, less disoriented guitar lead, just playing kind of chords underneath the whole thing. The whole tune, just in general, like the vibe of it, has a very off-kilter, avant-garde kind of like atmosphere, I suppose. The lyrics really reinforce this too, because they're often very just bizarre and off-putting, very narrative and what's the word? Almost literary to some extent as well. It's telling a story. At least I'm pretty sure. I haven't read the lyrics or delved into it a ton, but the whole thing just comes together again beautifully. It's another brilliant track, slightly slower and maybe more like kind of like sunburn, I guess is the best way I could describe it, compared to like the opening track. But yeah, it brings its own vibe, but still very insane, very dynamic. A lot of good shit going on in this track. Then the next song is probably the most conventional Black Midi song. It was also the first single, so I guess it makes a lot of sense in that regard, I suppose. But the next song is Welcome to Hell, and this one is the most like what I would expect from something off Cavalcade. The whole song is really built around a core riff. In a way, it feels like John L. Part 2, just a tiny bit, but there's still a ton to enjoy about the song. There's a bunch of like cinematic stabs. There's still a decent amount of layering going on. There's still loads and loads of instrumental flourishes thrown throughout the main riff, just like in John L. It has some really, really cool drum breaks. The manic ending portion is just buck wild. So, another really, really strong song for sure. But you have basically had just 3 non-stop, or maybe even 4, I guess you could say, non-stop, incredibly colourful, absolutely bizarre tunes in a row. So it makes sense that the next song is an attempt at a calmer song than after the just unrelenting assault of the first 3. It's called Still, slightly longer. Again, it has a slightly psychedelic vibe about it with its hushed vocals and colourful layers. But fortunately, this one actually has a pretty good sense of progression as it moves forward, solving the previous issue that I had with a lot of the slower tracks on Cavalcade. The back half goes into a much more soundscapey direction as well, with the song breaking down to a gently picked guitar, and the vocals kind of end up melting into a droning sound to carry the song to its very, very end. And then after that, you get a really, really short interlude, which maybe is part of the narrative of the album that I haven't quite worked out, but we'll just ignore that for now. It's just a very short, almost like announcement, I suppose you could say. Then the next song is called The Race Is About to Begin, and oh my god, I think this is probably one of the most insane tracks that Black Midi have ever put together. And I know I've said that a decent amount, but this is like a 7-minute odyssey that just... The first half is essentially I don't know, math rock, or I don't know how to put it, like post-punk mathcore, I guess. It's just constantly pivoting hard into different rhythmic ideas, different grooves. It's just all over the place in terms of how insane it opens. The song is constantly in flux and disorientating while still being incredibly colourful and embellished as all hell. The drumming on this track, and for the record, the drummer, oh, pardon me, the drummer of this band is unbelievably good. He's one of the best drummers I think Britain has produced in a while, it feels like. He's legitimately fantastic. But on this track, he just goes absolutely buck fucking wild. He's all over the place with strange accenting and patterns that just really help the rest of the instrumentation and how bizarre the track is all pulled together in a very cohesive way, even if it is disorienting and wild as hell. I would say the best way to describe this track is that it feels like it's constantly firing on all cylinders when it's actually going. There's a portion in the middle where the vocals are just narrating about 10,000 words a second. It's absolutely wild. The riffs, like I said, are relentless across the entire track. The whole thing is just hellish, it's colourful, it's incredibly theatrical, and it really is kind of like a crown jewel for the record, I feel like. This is like a very solid highlight. I mean, again, not to say that there aren't others, because there certainly are. I think Sugar Dash Zoo, like I said, is one of my favourite songs that Black Midi, I think, have ever put together, really. Same with Eat Men Eat. And this is just another one of those on the record. So after such an absolutely insane, abrasive, and long cut, it makes sense for them to, again, bring things down just slightly. And Dangerous Liaisons does that. It opens with some acoustic guitar before building into something that ends up being quite jazzy, almost slightly lounge-esque, but it still maintains that kind of avant-garde oddity that Black Midi captures a lot of the time, and it still, as a result, ends up being quite strange and slightly off-putting. Naturally, the whole thing keeps pulling in louder and louder and more intense sounds slowly until it bursts at the very end. This is one of those songs, though, that I feel like I'll have more of an appreciation for as I come back to it over and over again, because I feel like the progression here is really strong, but it's difficult to pull the words together to describe it because it's not really like much I've heard previously, to be honest. It's a strange song, but I do think it's a really good one. The next song, The Defense, is a very short and sweet one that kind of surprising. It's probably the only one on the record that I would genuinely describe as sweet sounding in a very normal, conventional sense. It's almost got a slightly baroque pop sounding element to it, with a bunch of upbeat piano and shuffling drums. It almost reminds me a tiny bit of a short version of something that could have been on the new Black Country New Road record, and it's surprisingly blissful from start to finish. Solid track, for sure. And then, of course, we get to the final song, and this track essentially just captures the entire feeling of that overblown, really theatrical, very cinematic, but colourful and extremely off-kilter and slightly demented vibe that the entire album has going for it. It opens with a stabbing piano that sets the stage for the most demented song on the album, without a shadow of a doubt. As it builds, more sounds, just in the most hellish way you could possibly imagine, just crash into the mix. They're never coming in like a subtle or nice way. Everything introduced, just it feels like, it feels like a car crashing straight through into your front room, essentially. It's all incredibly violent, but it does it in such a kind of like planned out way that it just sells itself incredibly well. Again, very disorienting, very off kilter, lots of strange sounds crashing into the mix almost every moment. It feels like a barrage in a lot of ways. But it keeps you on your toes, and it's very entertaining throughout. I actually love the riff about halfway through the song that serves to kind of anchor a lot of the insanity, even if it doesn't last particularly long in the song. But after all of this just extremely colourful and strange, like rhythmic choices and riffing and these just absolutely bizarre sounding vocals as well, after all of that, for the first half of the song, it cuts into a more acoustic section, which is kind of a trick the record's pulled a decent number of times. But again, the way they utilize this dynamic idea on this song is absolutely perfect. It breaks into this acoustic section that drags for quite a while, building on itself slowly over time, brings in some of those more jazzy drums that you would expect as well in this kind of moment. It feels really like the light at the end of the tunnel. But after, I don't know, maybe like another 2 minutes or so, right to the final like minute or 30 seconds of the song, you're just sucked straight back into the nightmare soundscape, serving as a great and unique way to close the record. It's a really impactful moment on the album. I don't think they've really pulled off much like this song before. It's just very impressive, and I honestly can't wait to listen to this record a lot more and dive even deeper into it, because this feels like, I would say this is definitely my favourite Black Midi record, at least on a first listen. I don't really think I can come up with that many criticisms of it, to be honest. It feels incredibly cohesive. It feels like they've taken every element of their sound that worked previously, elevated it, got the elements that they were kind of like toying with before and felt like more experiments before, and fully just integrated them into every element of this album. It's a brilliant journey front to back. It's kind of incredible. It's only 40 minutes because it goes so many different places that it's just very impressive all around, really. But yeah, I'm very impressed with this record. I cannot wait to see them live again. And yeah, I can't wait to hear more from these guys just in general, because they seem to be pardon me. They seem to be a creative machine that just can't be stopped at this point. They've released a lot of music in a short amount of time, especially considering just how dense and detailed it all is. It's very impressive. So yeah, very exciting things for Black Midi. I think this is their best record. Very excited to listen to it more. That's pretty much everything I have to say. Cheers for listening. I hope you've enjoyed, and peace out, everybody.